everybody. Thank you so much for coming out. We're going to have a great meetup today, filled with lots of information. Our first speaker will be Dina Mainville, Commercial Director, Strategic Partnerships and Innovation at Infotech Research Group. Dina empowers CIOs to effectively deliver business value by providing guidance, analysis, and frameworks needed to optimize projects and operational processes. She will be breaking down the Crypto-Craze, a primer of blockchain technology. Without further ado, Dina.
So thanks everybody for being here. I'm Dina, and I have been in the blockchain space for about 2 years now. It's been kind of a wild ride. I remember when I first heard about blockchain, I was on a conference call with a financial services client. The CIO, who actually happens to be in the room today, Mark, thank you for being here, changed my life. He sort of casually dropped the term blockchain, and I wasn't familiar with it, so I Googled it, and I didn't sleep for 4 days. No lie. I read hundreds and hundreds of pages of information, trying to consume everything that I could, and I remember it being a very irritating experience to begin with because I felt like I had been given the secret that would change humanity, and I had no one to talk to about it. So it was a pretty long ride. Now, fast forward to 2017, so last year, and it felt like blockchain kind of blew up. And not for the technology itself, but for its tradable assets. Social media platforms, financial markets, everyone was abuzz about cryptocurrencies, or internet money, as it had been called, and ICOs, or initial coin offerings. There were a lot of people in the space, new investors, many of whom were not familiar with the technology itself, but people who were making tons of money. And the flip side to that was there were people that were losing everything that they had. So all people wanted to do last year was talk about these new coins that had come to fruition. And people ask me all the time, what should I be investing in? Should I have sold my Bitcoin when it was 20,000? Should I buy it now that it's 8? Should I have sold my Ether in December when it was $1,200? All of these really big questions. And my sort of investment advice to those people and to everyone in this room is really one of education. I think it's important to kind of step back and understand the technology that actually powers a cryptocurrency, because by doing so, you acquire skills that are going to pay you dividends for years and years to come. So learning about, hashing algorithms and cryptography, things like game theory and economic theory, these are the skills that you can take with you into the future, and those are the things that are actually going to help you make decisions about where you need to be investing. So to talk a little bit about what blockchain is, I'm going to tell you it is the internet of value. And this is typically the response that I get when I say that. That was kind of my face too when I was told this the first time. So in order to understand the internet of value, we have to understand the traditional internet that we're all used to using. So in a traditional internet, we're used to sending files to one another. So we send Word documents, we send audio clips, video clips, and in doing so, what we're actually doing is retaining a copy for ourselves and sending a copy of that file to someone else. This is no small human accomplishment. This has changed the world. It's democratized information, and it's allowed us to collapse geopolitical boundaries. The thing that the internet was never really well suited for is transacting things of value. So things like money, for example, where if we were to make a copy of a $5 bill and send it to someone else, that original $5 bill wouldn't have the same value. So the internet isn't a suitable mechanism for exchanging these types of things. So instead, what we do is we rely on trusted third parties. We rely on credit reporting agencies, data aggregators, lawyers, banks, and third parties are okay. We'll come back to why they're not perfect in just a little bit. So what is a blockchain? Well, a blockchain is basically a digital ledger or a digital book. It's almost like an Excel spreadsheet, similar to what you see when you open your TD app on your phone, right? So it's got a series of inputs and outputs, kind of shows you a balance. Now, A blockchain isn't a ledger that's maintained by a traditional third party, but it's instead maintained by a peer-to-peer network. Okay, so it looks something like this. There's lots of different computers that are working on it, and together they reach consensus on the state of the ledger. So for the example today, we're going to look at the Bitcoin blockchain. It's the one that most people are familiar with. It's the largest, most powerful blockchain that we have. And in order to understand how it works, I want you to kind of visualize a really big web or a network of millions of computers around the globe. Now, these computers, like I said, are collaborating. It's a peer-to-peer network, and their job is to act as bookkeepers on this ledger. Now, they're disinterested in the outcome of transactions. They don't care what happens. They're instead governed by mathematical logic and clever code. The other thing they're governed by, actually, is an economic scheme, which we'll get to in a little bit. So let's introduce two parties. This is Hipster Alice and Hipster Bob, and they want to transact value with one another. So what's going to happen in this case is Alice is going to announce to the network, who's always listening, hey everybody, I want to transfer 1 Bitcoin to Bob. Now, remember, the job of the network is to act as bookkeepers, and they want to reach consensus on the state of affairs. So we're going to make sure that everyone's on the same page about things, and that's how the ledger is kept up to date. So in this situation, the way a Bitcoin or series of Bitcoins or a token on a blockchain is kept secure is through something called a digital wallet. So much like the wallet that you have in your purse or on your person right now, its intention is to hold Bitcoin or, in the case of another blockchain, a different type of token. Now, each wallet is associated with a set of keys. So what Alice is going to do is she's going to broadcast the message, I send 1 Bitcoin to Bob, and she's going to sign that message with her private key. So she's the only one that can see that key. The rest of the network is going to be able to verify that she has authorized this transaction by providing digital consent in using the accompanying public key. Okay, so that's how this works. This is called public and private key cryptography. Now, the other thing that Bitcoin does is it, for every transaction that comes into the ledger, we date stamp it and time stamp it. We also obfuscate the identities of the people that are undergoing this transaction. And so what you would see in the ledger is something very similar to this. This side represents Alice, that side represents Bob, and all we see is that 1 Bitcoin was transferred at date X on time Y by 1 alphanumeric address to another. So, as we move on, what basically happens here is a block of transactions is generated. So this contains all of the transactions that have occurred from one person to another within the previous 10 minutes. Now, what's happening in the background here is this system of computers, we call them miners. They are basically undergoing an algorithm, and they are submitting billions of guesses to find a number that we're going to call n. So these computers are devoting a ton of computational power, their electricity, and they're trying to find n because they want to be the first participant in this network to be able to say, I found the puzzle that's associated with this block, and be the first to incorporate that block into their version of the blockchain. So this guy right here is doing math, he wants to get paid, and he announces to the network, hey, I found n. Now, this system is designed such that n is computationally very difficult to find. As I said, we're generating billions of guesses. But given n and the block, it's very easy to verify. So the rest of the network says, yep, n looks right, all of the transactions in this block look right, and they simultaneously update their copies of the ledger. Now, the guy that solved the problem, he's going to get paid. That's why he's participating in the system in the first place. So this participant in the network gets newly minted Bitcoin. And again, that's the economic incentive for why this person is participating in the blockchain to begin with. Now, what makes the system so secure is how blocks are set up. So we have a block of transactions that's generated and something called a cryptographic hash. So this functions a lot like a digital fingerprint. It represents not only the block itself, but all of the data inside the block. So it's almost like a digest of information. So a new block is generated with its own cryptographic hash and a new block. Now, the cryptographic hashes also point to the previous block, something like this. Now you can imagine with all of the transactions that happen in a blockchain, you've got all of these hashes, and this is why we call it a blockchain. Now let's introduce a bad actor. So maybe this is Alice, she's in disguise, and she wants to go back and double spend that Bitcoin that she gave to Bob earlier. She would have to go into a block of transactions, find her transaction, and hack it. Now, on top of that, she would also have to regenerate the successor blocks, and in doing so, each of these blocks would have a different digital fingerprint. So the rest of the network is going to look at this and say, wait a second, that doesn't match our versions. This is wrong, and we're not going to include this. We're not going to come to consensus on this. So this system is very secure. Written into the protocol is a rule that in order to actually hack a transaction or change a transaction that's been confirmed, you would actually need 51% of the computational power in the network. Even Google can't do that. So the system is very secure, it can see a bad actor, and it just ignores the transaction. That doesn't get included. Now, this works a little bit different than traditional money systems. If you look at a government, for example, we can just keep printing money. In a Bitcoin scenario, it doesn't work like that. We've got something called fixed distribution of tokens. And so what that means is there are only 21 million Bitcoin that will ever be mined. And the only way that we can mine Bitcoin is to be actually working on the blocks that come up with all of those transactions. So it looks something like this. Now, this is interesting because on the surface, Bitcoin and blockchain, they look similar to just a payment system, and that's it. But in reality, the technology has actually evolved to allow us to do a lot more than that. We've got these new things called smart contracts that basically allow us to program logic into a blockchain. So we can say, if something happens, then the software needs to execute on A, B, C, D, E behaviors. So I'll give you an example. I might say to a friend sitting in the audience who wants to rent my apartment, that you need to, give me 2 Bitcoin. You've got between 9 and 9:15 on Friday to do so. Once it hits the wallet that I give you, the smart lock on my front door will open. And so now we're incorporating things like Internet of Things, and it begs the question, what happens in this scenario to an Airbnb? If I'm a content creator, I might decide to publish my music to a blockchain. I'm going to wrap it up in a smart contract, and that way, when you try to download it, you need to pay me. So what happens to the music labels? And a very timely sort of idea here is, what if we got people to pay us for the data that we create? So rather than Facebook being able to give that data or maybe show people where they should be advertising, what if that data belongs to me, and in order for someone to target advertisings to the demographic pool to which I belong, they have to pay me? So going back to the sort of third-party scenario that I had talked about in the beginning, blockchain is so amazing because it has a real capability to change the way a lot of people live their lives. And I think some of the biggest opportunities are not even for the Western world. If you look at financial services in particular, there are 2.5 billion, with a B, people all over the place who don't have access to basic financial instruments. And because of that, they have no access to the global economy. They can't open bank accounts. About 70% of the people across the globe can't prove that they own the land that they've been living on their entire lives. They have no access to land registration systems. So imagine what this technology can do when we're actually codifying things that we own into a ledger that is not able to be tampered with. These are not disputable records. I think my advice to you here today, if you're looking for what to invest in, is definitely on the education side of things, because that's going to equip you with the knowledge to understand how this technology is going to disrupt everything around you. Questions? Yeah.
Is it true that if somebody forgets the password, there's no way to retrieve it?
Yeah. That's a simple answer. Yeah, so I think one of the biggest challenges for the question is it true that there's no password recovery in this system? And that is 100% true. So when you own those keys that I was talking about, the private keys, when they're lost for good. So you hear about people having bought Bitcoin like years and years ago and left it on a hard drive. Yeah, that sucks. I think one of the biggest sort of barriers to adoption is going to be a knowledge thing, where I call IT all the time, like every 2 weeks, I'm like, I lost my password again. So this is a behavior that we're definitely going to have to correct, but yeah, once it's gone, it's kind of gone. Related to that point, what a lot of people do is they'll create backups. One is just like due diligence, creating backups of your password, stuff like that. Also, there's something called two-factor authentication, which is an application you put on your phone, and it actually allows you to, if you lose your password, recover it through that. It's like a very complicated thing, but like you said, you just have to educate yourself. There's like a ton of resources. BlockGeeks is one of them, which I really like. Yeah. You know what? You bring up a great point. One of the things I would suggest is if you are getting a wallet, I mean, the safest place to put tokens is on a hardware wallet. It's almost like a USB key. You can kind of see your balance. That's the safest place. The second safest place is on paper. So if you do get a wallet, you want to be able to, have some sort of backup function. So you definitely want to be writing this information down. Any other questions?
Question, as you mentioned education, but so what would you suggest or recommend to someone like me who want to learn more about blockchain? Where do you go to in terms of course materials and learning materials? Very good question. So I kind of leveraged a social network. So I started following people like Andreas Antonopoulos, Vitalik Buterin, Roger Ver, all of the really important voices in this space. There's also an application called CoinDesk. They also have a LinkedIn. They publish a ton of blockchain research, and it's not for only healthcare or only retail or only manufacturing. They kind of do everything. So I would get onto social media, follow some Twitter accounts. There are also some really great courses that are coming into the scene. There's one, Princeton has a course that's available on Coursera. It's incredible. There's a bit of coding, there's a lot of theory. University of Nicosia just started, they're actually the first university in the world now to have a master's program for digital currency, so you can take a course from them for free. Oxford now has a 6-week program available, so yeah, I would just get on the internet. This isn't like it was a couple years ago when you would Google and only end up in Reddit. It's a little bit more proliferated now, so yeah, lots of really good resources online. Anyone else?
Yeah, Gartner's research states that blockchain technology has pretty much reached the peak of inflated expectations.
Hype cycle.
Right, the hype cycle, correct. Yeah. And then it's going to go through the natural course of the trough of disillusionment. So between the hype of the media and vendors and what we're seeing from technology professionals that actually work on implementing this technology, what are some of the realities that are some of the challenges that industry experts are seeing in this technology?
There's a lot. It's a very good question too. Talent shortage is a huge challenge. Some of these devs, so if you look at, for example, Ethereum is a blockchain, a lot of what they do is written in this program called Solidity, and it's not a normal program for developers. And there's job postings all the time, especially in the States, where they're paying developers like $250,000 a year US to write on this stuff. So I think subject matter expertise is a big barrier to adoption. There's scalability issues as well. We talked in the sort of Bitcoin scheme, the way these computers are submitting billions of guesses is through this algorithm called SHA-256, and it's proof of work, which means it's very labor intensive. You can imagine there are like data centers that are dedicated to mining Bitcoin, and that's not exactly environmentally friendly. So one of the other challenges is there are cryptographers all over the world that are submitting proposals for new consensus algorithms to figure out how to make this stuff more environmentally friendly, how to scale it so we're processing the same amount of transactions that, let's say, Visa is processing. So the technology is still very nascent. Gartner's not wrong. We are in a hype cycle, and as I kind of mentioned at the beginning, if you look at all of the tokens that are coming up and all of these sort of Ponzi schemes, people are just getting taken advantage of because they just want to make a quick buck, and again, they don't really understand the technology or how it works. Yeah.
So you talked about the economic model of mining Bitcoins. I was wondering if you could talk a bit about the economic model for maintaining the ledger.
For maintaining the ledger? Yeah, so what happens after there are no more Bitcoins to be mined? Like, what's the incentive to keep the ledger intact? Yeah. So I think they estimate around 2064 or something, or 2164, that all of the Bitcoins will be mined. And so the question really is, why would we decide to participate in this system and donate all of these computational resources and electricity if we're not getting anything out of it? In addition to the newly minted Bitcoins, the miners are actually, they're also taking transaction fees. So I think we anticipate that in the future, you'll be able to maybe adopt something similar to Ethereum where you can say, okay, I will maybe increase my transaction fee, so this gets included. And that's kind of the solution to the economic problem behind this.
Just a couple of questions. One of your slides, you show us the printing mode, which governments are actually doing.
Yeah.
So what I'm understanding is that with Bitcoin, we kind of going back to the gold standard. Like I cannot produce more than that the network can give us.
You are exactly right. So the distribution sort of system that's built into the protocol is modeled exactly after gold. Mm-hmm. The thought is that if there is a limited supply of these tokens, then over time the value of the tokens will go up, which is very much why people in some parts of the world where they're continually seeing their home currency deflated and depreciated, they're treating Bitcoin and other tokens as a store of value for exactly that reason.
But on the same subject, so Bitcoin is one of the offerings. So what might stop somebody to start creating Ethereum or other stuff?
Nothing.
Nothing, right?
No, this is open source, and that's why there's like 800 tokens. So it's really important. There are a lot of cases. I mean, I think one of my colleagues is speaking a little bit about the regulatory landscape, but there are a lot of talks in courts about how safe these things are from a consumer perspective. Because, there were cases last year where someone would, they crowdfund all this money. They'd go to ICO and raise millions of dollars in like 5 seconds. And there's no contractual obligation to actually develop the token or the platform for which the token is being raised. So I think with regulation, this space will get a little bit more clear. But that's also a two-edged sword because more regulation means you're stifling innovation. So I think people are having a bit of a difficult time with this space, and that's exactly why. I can create a token and sell it to all of you guys. So there are a lot of gray areas there.
I think we should maybe pause now.
Mm-hmm. Someone else wants to come up?
Yeah.
All right.
Ask questions after.
Thank you guys.